Okay, so today it is September 18th. So I thought a little discussion about fall weed management. I mean, usually a lot of people think about, you know, weed management as a spring and summer activity, but there's a lot you can learn about the weeds that are out in your field and get yourself prepared for the next year to not have quite as many problems. So let's see. There we go. So what we're going to do today is I'll talk a little bit about what the Organic Farming Association is all about, and then what weeds you might be having out there. I'll be showing you some weeds and where, and then what are they telling you? Because they can be an indicator of issues that you can modify and then not have them be a problem in the future. So that will be also including some soil testing and then applying different amendments to balance your soil nutrients. I'll talk about winter cover crops that can also make a big difference in what you might, kind of dealing with some of your issues. And then early spring cover crops before the crops would be planted, and then doing some perennial like full season. If you have a really bad problem, sometimes it's nice to just like put it into a perennial crop for a season and then deal with it that way. And then we'll have questions. So who is the Organic Farmers Association? And we are farmers. So I am a farmer. My farm has been certified organic since 1989. See, I've got gray hair. And we work with farmers around the country and mostly do advocacy. We work a lot with federal and state government and agencies to improve the options for organic farmers, the policies. So much of our governmental policies can really affect the livelihoods of farmers. And so we work to make that those policies more friendly and for all types of farmers, but specifically for organic farmers. We also have these work groups that we have. You can go on our website, organicfarmersassociation.org, and sign up, and you can attend one, or you can attend sometimes they're every month, sometimes they're every 3 months, depends on the different subjects. But we have had some really good luck working, especially with the organic crop insurance working group, as well as the USDA programs, where farmers have gotten together and talked about issues. And then we have gone to the agencies that oversee those programs and gotten them to change some of their policies that were causing problems for the organic farmers. So it's really farmer led. What are the issues? What are the problems? What do you want to see fixed? And then the organization uses our staff to go there and make change, good change. So that's who we are and what we do. We also obviously do educational activities, anything to help organic farmers. We try to listen and then put in place programs that are useful. So the first thing would be is that, and this is being recorded, so there'll be other people will be looking at this afterwards. What weeds were problematic this past year, and in which fields? Because a lot of times the weeds are kind of giving you an indicator of soil nutrients as well as soil tilth, So I'll go into that. So you look and you see, well, do you have grasses? Like, do you have quackgrass or foxtail? In the southeast, there's a Johnson grass, there's a nutsedge. Not really sure about what type of grasses there are in Arizona, but they'll give you some ideas of what is going on. This is a field full of foxtail. And then there's broadleaf leaves, and that's really a lot of times one of the bigger issues because those broad leaves can then shade out like young crops that you want to grow. So red root pickweed, lamb's quarter, buttonweed, purslane, galansaga, mustards, mare's tail, chickweed, shepherd's purse, different kinds of docks. These are all, and there's many, many more that are indicators of certain things. So what are these weeds telling you? Well, they can tell you if your soil is heavily compacted. I didn't even write this down, but if you have thistles, that's a sign of compacted soil. Is it poorly drained? Is it too alkaline? Is your pH very high or is your pH very low? Because that's going to affect the health of your crop. But the weeds a lot of times can help you pinpoint where the problems are. And if you walk through a field, you might see certain weeds in one area and different weeds in another. And so that's also because the fields are not always uniform as far as the issues and the soil types. A lot of times certain weeds will tell you if you have good fertility, if you're doing the right thing for certain weeds. So when I see lamb's quarters, I'm like, okay, I have good fertile soil. But what are those lamb's quarters like? That good fertile soil, and they will drop about 15 to 18,000 seeds per plant. So like you don't want them to go to seed. Is there an imbalance? A lot of times it's not just that you might have high magnesium, but it would mean in relationship to your calcium. There's a relationship between the soil nutrients that these weeds can tell you. A high phosphorus, low phosphorus, especially if you're bringing in manures, you might find a lot of phosphorus. And then it's a good idea just to do a late summer soil test, especially where you have weeds that are basically, if you've lost a lot of or all of your crop, and that happens. And of course, if the weeds are going to seed, just come in and mow them down before those seeds mature. You don't want to add more weed seeds to the weed seed bank in your soil. And they do stay in a little bank. For a long time, this is something that organic farmers have really looked at, is looking at the weeds and so you're looking here at horsetail, and it's a sign of very wet soil and compacted soil and acidic soil. But it's a lot of times we in organic have said, well, the weeds are telling us something, and we're going to look at our soil tests. And the standard science was kind of like, oh, that doesn't mean anything. But then I went on the internet and I found all kinds of extension agents and extension publications around the country that have now kind of come on board that looking at your weeds is a way to help you understand how to balance the nutrients. So I would, go on and Google that, for the Southwest, New Mexico, Arizona, and, even like Utah and Colorado, to see what might be issues there in your climate and soil type. There's also an organization called Acres USA, which sells books and videos. And they sell this one book called When Weeds Talk. And this book has been out for 30 or 40 years. And for many years, I was an organic inspector, and I went around with this book. And whenever I saw weeds especially overwhelming weeds in a field, I would pull out my book. I'd say to the farmer, look at this, it looks like you've got an issue, especially if you've got 4 or 5 of the weeds and the issues are the same for all those issues. And then we would go inside and look at the soil test, and it was right on with the soil test. So the weeds are kind of giving you something to compare to in your soil testing. But it's also, it was very interesting to kind of see, especially too, as I learned more by going to all these different farms and seeing what the weeds were indicating. And then looking, oh, okay, that's a lower end of the field and it sometimes floods. And look at all that horsetail or thistle or nutsedge, the things that are indicators of very wet soil. So here's a soil test on my farm. I'm not sure what year this was from, but it's really important. A lot of times, if you get a soil test, it'll just have nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, N, P, and K. And you really need to know a lot more than that. You need to know the micronutrients. So spend the extra money and get all these other micronutrients here so you can see iron, manganese, copper, boron, calcium, magnesium, because it's those micronutrients that really help your plant uptake the nutrients that they need from the soil. They also greatly affect the tilth, how loose the soil is. So then how deep can those roots go into the soil, which makes them more drought resistant. They can gather more nutrients. You want to have deep roots if that's what the plant likes to do. The other thing too is when the soil is looser, it is so much easier to weed. When you have compacted soil, you're trying to yank these out, or you're using mechanical weed control. When it's a very dense and compacted soil, the equipment will like throw the weeds with the soil still connected to the roots, and the weeds won't even die. You want your soil to kind of crumble away from the roots so that then the weeds that you're trying to kill will die because they don't have nutrients. And calcium is really good for that. It's helping to loosen up and break up compaction. So, by looking at this soil test, I would see that my magnesium is much higher than my calcium. Well, no, it's not actually. My calcium is much higher than my magnesium, even though the magnesium is still coming up very high in the soil test. But when I look at the numbers, I'm doing pretty good because that's what you want. You actually want to have about 6 times as much calcium as magnesium. So I should bring up my calcium some. But I would look at it and I'd say, this field probably does not have too many grass problems because grass is really like compacted soil. So I'm kind of using it both ways of having the weeds tell me what my nutrient balance might be or imbalance. And then I'm looking at my soil test and wondering, is that what I'm going to find out in the field? So using them both ways. So I'm sorry, the picture is a little bit fuzzy, but this is an example of when weeds talk. And I put the red root pigweed in there. And so you can see across so that's all the common name, the scientific name going vertically on the left-hand side. And then all the way across are all the different nutrients and soil types, moist, a lot of salt, hard pan, poor drainage, sandy soil, sticky soil, a lot of humus, not a lot of humus. And so you can see the L means low, the H means high, VH means very high, average, whatever, good, and they have, for the drainage, good and poor. And so that really kind of gives you an idea. And this is basically that whole book is like this. It's about, I don't know, 30 pages with about 30 different weed names. I think the book is only like $20, and you can get it from Acres. So it's really a very handy resource, but of course you can also go online and probably find a lot of this information too. So this has taught me a lot, especially like I have a high tunnel on my farm where I raise spinach through the winter, and I have had various issues through the years with different perennial weeds. So I've had my high tunnel high about 22 years. So you can imagine that it has its own ecosystem in there. And so I've learned a lot by using this book about what I need to do to balance my soil nutrients in that kind of high value real estate. So what do you do in the fall? Well, you can apply your amendments. You can look, get some calcium, uh, and you can do it in large areas. You can do it in small areas. A lot of times there are consultants out there that can help you kind of figure out, especially the larger field operation. Um, you can apply the amendments either in the fall or in the early spring. Um, and use both your weed and your crop observations. How did the crops that you grew this past season, did they do well? Were they beaten out by weeds? Did they have kind of a poor color? And then of course, obviously look at your recent soil tests too to help prioritize. You're never going to get everything perfect all the time because things are always changing. But you might want to prioritize certain nutrients to bring things more into balance, to improve your soil's tilth, openness, and what you're doing is, and this I have absolutely seen on my own farm and on other people's farms, when you change the soil balance and the tilth, the weeds go away that you are targeting. The other weeds will come, right? Because like the lamb's quarters love it when it's like perfect. So then you'll get lamb's quarters, but you'll get rid of your foxtail or whatever. They just cannot thrive. Now those weed seeds are still there, but because it's not the right environment for them in the soil is looser and loamier. So the thistle goes away because it likes compacted soil. So if you add calcium, you're going to greatly reduce your thistle problems. And so that happens, and I have seen that happen on farmers' fields. And as an organic inspector, a lot of times I go back the same farm, sometimes the next year, sometimes 3 years down the road or whatever. And they would say, look at this field. I added this nutrient or this amendment and change the soil balance. And here's this other field right next to it, same soil type. I still have my weed problem over here, but over here the weeds have changed and they're not as big an issue. So what I like to say too is we have the big brains, so we should be paying attention to what we see and use the tools that we have to make it less uh, kind of a happy place for those weeds. So, so think about your weed issues. You're never going to take care of all of them all at once, but little over time you can fix it. Sorghum Sudan is something that you can grow the following season. That is really good for thistle control. We had purchased some wheat seed and it came with some thistle on it. And so we ended up the next year having a lot of thistle. So we decided in this one just strip that we were going to grow our squash in. We looked at it. We said, we're not growing squash there. There's way too many thistle. So we grew sorghum Sudan in there. And what you do, it's a grass and it grows very rapidly and very tall. But what you do is you plant it. You can plant it shallow. Don't do a lot of tillage if you have thistle because you'll just cut the roots up into little pieces and make many, many more of them. So you want to put in your sorghum Sudan thick and then go in and mow it whenever it reaches about 3 feet. What's happening is the thistle is trying to also grow. in this very thick grass, and the sorghum Sudan has leaves almost as thick as corn. So it's very thick. And so the thistle is getting very few nutrients from the soil because the sorghum Sudan is taking all the nutrients and moisture, and getting very few nutrients from the sun because the sorghum Sudan is shading it. So what the thistle is doing is using the nutrients that it has stored in its root to grow. And so every time it grows up about 3 feet, you cut it off and you make it grow again. By the end of the season, if you do that at least 3 times, you will lose. But those, whatever is left of the thistle will die over the winter because it doesn't have enough nutrient in we've exhausted the roots. So they go away. So we've gone out, we had in the area just this year, and we can hardly find any thistle plants in there anymore. We've already killed them. They're not growing anymore. So it really works well. What this picture is of tillage radish. So we're probably going to go in and maybe plant some tillage radish in there this fall. Because that breaks compaction, right? So the thistle was also telling us that it was compacted, but also all of the biomass of the sorghum Sudan has been breaking down and adding humus and opening up that soil too. We always, especially organic farmers, but all farmers are always looking for sources of nitrogen. So like chickling vetch is one of my favorites. It's an annual vetch. It can grow whenever oats can grow, which means it can take kind of a light frost. I use it a lot in my high tunnel for nitrogen because I don't like to bring manure into my high tunnel because I'm concerned about the salts and the high phosphorus because it's in an enclosed environment, so it never gets the rain to kind of wash those things out. So I use chickling vetch a lot in my high tunnel. Sometimes I mix it a little bit with buckwheat. So I get my grass control. I love buckwheat because it's really good for beneficial insects. And then of course, mixing things. So a little bit of chickling vetch with some buckwheat, sorghum Sudan, with tillage radish, figuring out the right percentages. It can be a little tricky. A lot of times, a lot of seed houses actually sell mixes, all planned so that the sorghum Sudan won't canopy over, and there's like maybe only 30% sorghum Sudan in there, so it won't outcompete the other cover crops that you're trying to have in there. Oats and peas are very easy to find. So you got a legume with the peas, you got the oats. I like to mix buckwheat and soybeans. Soybeans are a great cover crop, really a lot of nitrogen there. So think about what the weeds told you, and then choose your cover crops for the following season or for that fall. So you can apply if you think you want to do fall cover crops. Here is some clover being that was overseeded into a cornfield. And that clover will live all winter long. So you can't really go in and plant that clover with ground-driven equipment because the corn was actually green and living when it was planted. But you could use a drone. This is a kind of new technology now. People are using drones or airplanes. The only thing is, if you're organic, you got to make sure that their tanks that they're holding the seed in were clean. You can't have had an herbicide or whatever in it before you're using it. But this works really great. Right now, I have another slide. So you can also frost seed clovers, especially, and we've had excellent luck with this. I know there's not a lot of snow. Well, there is some snow in Arizona, depending where in Arizona you are. You put your clover seed, and you wouldn't use grasses, but legumes can do excellent here. You put it on top of the snow, and then when the snow starts to melt, it takes the seed down as the water of the snow is melting and puts it into the little cracks in the soil and plants it for you. And I have had excellent luck with seeding red clover like this for 30 years. We do this all the time. We're always cross-seeding red clover and get excellent results. So there's a lot of legumes that you could think about, these annual legumes. We've also used chickling vetch interseeding. We've done it into, it doesn't get real tall, so we've done it like in our tomato, in between our tomato rows. And sometimes in our squash rows, doesn't do as well in the squash because it needs sunlight. And the squash, really covers too much. If we have an area that we're taking out of production for the year, we'll use like yellow blossom sweet clover or crimson clovers or Austrian winter peas. It all depends on your region and what grows well. There'll be a lot of extension publications for your area that would tell you what kind of legumes work well in your area. But giving some thought to legumes so you don't have to, you can use that for your nitrogen source or at least partial. Why not let the plants work for you? They're taking the nitrogen out of the air and putting it into the soil for you rather than you having to spread something else. So this was something that I just learned this year. And I told you, I have been farming actually since the late 70s. And I learned something new this year and we're very excited about it. We interseeded some rapeseed. It's actually a rapeseed and a brassica. It was called Essex into our corn. Because our sweet corn, sometimes we're trying to find something that would really smother the weeds. Once, after the last cultivation, we would just have issues with weeds. And it's worked like a charm. It's been excellent. And it didn't get real tall, but it's shaded out everything else. And so, and then of course it'll just die and we'll incorporate it, more organic matter. Nature hates a vacuum. And so if you put in what you want to grow there, then it won't grow the weeds. So a lot of things to think about. Also, there's a system called organic no-till where you use a roller crimper and then put your plants into the dead rye. This is the time of year in the north here to plant your rye. And then next early June, maybe late May, you'll come in and roller crimp and then plant your plants into a mulch. So you don't have to spread mulch. The mulch is killed in place with this mechanical roller crimper. And this has been such a good system that actually non-organic farmers are using it now. They come in and kill the rye with herbicide, but I would never recommend that. But it is a very good system for controlling weeds, maintaining moisture, and of course, then you have a whole season where weeds don't grow, and so you're not contributing to your weed seed bank. And then lastly, if you really have an issue, but if you have even just chickens or pigs, sheep, consider planting either a strip or, if you're a larger farmer and you have cattle, putting in hay. And then having go a whole season hay or pasture, a whole season where you don't grow an annual crop, but the cattle will come in, or the chickens or the pigs, the sheep, they will eat down the weeds so that the weed seeds don't germinate and set new seed. So this is really a good way to deal with especially annual broadleafs, is to take it out of production for a season and either keep it mowed or have the animals mow it for you. So that was the presentation, but I also want to bring up that we have started the National Organic Farmer Education Network. where you go on our website and we've got a list of not just things that we do, but other organizations around the country, and kind of help you with whatever issues you may have. You'll be surprised. Somebody else has had that issue too, and hopefully there's something out there to help you overcome what you're experiencing and have success on your farm. So that's it. It's mostly time now. If anybody has, you have any questions,